"You flirted with the wrong man," said the mafia boss. She thought he was just a hot biker. The last drops of stale beer hissed as Lila Reed emptied the drip tray. It was 1 hour past midnight on a Tuesday, which in the Rust Belt outskirts of Fairhaven felt more like 4 in the morning on the moon. The town was a graveyard of forgotten industry, its bones picked clean by apathy and time. The bar, a dive called the Crow's Nest, was no different. It smelled of bleach, fried onions, and a deep, abiding regret. Lila finished wiping down the scarred mahogany bar top, the rag catching on a groove carved years ago by a man who'd lost his pension. She was tired, the kind of tired that sank into your bones and made you forget what rest felt like. She'd been running on fumes for 6 years, ever since she'd aged out of the system and landed here, the only place that felt broken enough to match her insides. Everyone else was long gone. The regulars had stumbled out hours ago, leaving behind sticky rings on the tables and a few crumpled dollars in the tip jar. Everyone except him. He sat in the darkest corner booth, a place usually reserved for drug deals or desperate, whispered arguments, but he was alone. He hadn't moved in over an hour. A half-empty glass of whiskey sweating in front of him. He was big, not just tall, but broad, filling the booth in a way that seemed to suck the light from the weak bulb flickering overhead. He wore a heavy leather cut, the kind bikers wore, but it was matte black, devoid of patches or colors, just leather, worn and thick. Lila had tried to ignore him, running the dishwasher, counting the meager till, sweeping the floor. But his presence was like a low-frequency hum, unsettling and constant. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't reading. He was just sitting, watching the room, though his gaze often settled on the exit. Lila sighed, clicking the register shut. Enough was enough. She needed to sleep. She walked over, her worn sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. She stopped a few feet from his table, forcing a weary brightness into her voice. "All right, handsome. Last call was 45 minutes ago. You planning on paying rent for that booth? Or are you just trying to win a staring contest with the salt shaker?" He didn't startle. He just lifted his head, slow and deliberate. The dim light caught the planes of his face. He was younger than she'd first thought, maybe early 30s, but he carried himself with the weight of a much older man. A shadow of dark stubble covered a jawline that looked carved from granite. His hair was thick and black, cut short on the sides, but it was his eyes that held her. They were dark, almost black, and held a stillness that was deeply unnerving. And he was scowling. Or maybe that was just his face. A deep, permanent line was etched between his brows. He looked at her, really looked at her, and Lila felt a strange jolt, a hot spark of awareness that had nothing to do with the temperature. He wasn't just a biker. He was something else. "Just enjoying the quiet," he said. His voice was gravel, low and smooth, like whiskey poured over stones. Lila leaned a hip against the next booth, crossing her arms. Her exhaustion made her bold. "Quiet? Honey, this place is a tomb after 10. You're just brooding. Does the scowl come naturally? Or did you have to practice that in the mirror? It's very impressive. Very tortured soul." A flicker. Not quite a smile, but the corner of his mouth twitched. The darkness in his eyes seemed to shift, lightening with a spark of amusement. "You talk this much to all your customers? Only the ones who overstay their welcome and look like they might murder someone over a jukebox selection," she retorted, gesturing to the silent, unplugged machine. "And that jacket, serious business. You expecting trouble or just trying to scare off the competition?" He leaned forward, bracing his thick forearms on the table. The movement was fluid, powerful, like a panther gathering itself. The intimidation factor rolled off him in waves, subtle but suffocating, maybe a little of both. His charm was a strange thing. It wasn't friendly, it was dangerous. It was the careful, assessing look in his eyes, the hint of a smile that didn't promise warmth, but suggested he knew things she didn't. He was cautious, his answers deflecting, yet they pulled her in. "Well," Lila said, pushing off the booth, "your time is up. Quiet's over. I've got to lock up and walk home before the real ghouls come out." He watched her for another long second, then reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a worn wallet. He pulled out a thick clip of cash and peeled off $100 bill, dropping it on the table next to his barely touched drink. Lila's eyes widened. That was more than she made in 3 shifts. I can't break this." "Don't," he said. He stood up, and Lila had to crane her neck to look at him. He was well over 6 feet, a solid wall of muscle and black leather. "Keep it." He moved toward the door. "Hey," she called out, a sudden, weird anxiety gripping her. "You never told me your name." He paused, his hand on the door, his back to her. "Dante." The door opened, the little bell above it giving a cheerful, metallic jingle that felt entirely out of place. He stepped out into the humid Fairhaven night and was gone. Lila stared at the $100 bill. Her hand was shaking slightly as she picked it up. Outside, across the 4-lane road, parked in the shadow of a derelict textile mill, sat a black SUV. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like polished obsidian. Inside, 2 men sat in silence. The passenger held a phone, the screen illuminating his hard, watchful face. He had been recording Dante for the last hour, ever since he'd parked his motorcycle, a sleek, black machine that looked more like a weapon than a vehicle, and entered the bar. "He's moving," the passenger said, his voice flat. "Did he meet anyone?" the driver asked. "Just the bartender, a girl. He sat alone the whole time." The driver grunted. "He knows we're here." "Of course he knows. He's Dante Morelli. He probably smelled us." Dante's bike roared to life, a deep, angry thunder that cut through the night. He didn't look toward the SUV. He just pulled onto the road and drove away. Not fast, but with a heavy, deliberate purpose. The SUV did not follow. The passenger zoomed the phone's camera in on the bar. A few minutes later, the lights inside clicked off. Lila Reed emerged, locking the heavy metal grate behind her. She pulled the hood of her worn sweatshirt up and started walking east. "What about the girl?" the driver asked. The passenger watched her retreating figure. "She's nobody. Just a bartender. Forget her." He lowered the phone. "Let's report to Luca. Morelli is here, and he's not hiding." Lila walked fast, her keys clutched between her fingers. Her apartment was 8 blocks away, a grim stretch of cracked pavement, boarded-up storefronts, and flickering, sulfur-yellow streetlights. It was a walk she'd done 1,000 times, her senses always on high alert. Fairhaven wasn't safe, especially not this late, tonight. The air felt different, heavier. It wasn't just the encounter with Dante, it was a prickle on the back of her neck, that feeling of being watched. She crossed the street, passing the abandoned railway yard. The silence was absolute, broken only by the scrape of her own sneakers on the asphalt. Then she heard it, another set of footsteps, heavier, unsteady but fast. Lila's heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't look back. She walked faster, her breath catching in her throat. The footsteps sped up, sloppy and menacing. "Hey!" a slurred voice called out. "Hey, sweet thing, wait up!" She broke into a run. She was 2 blocks from her building when a hand clamped down on her shoulder, spinning her around. He was thin, wiry, his eyes wide and frantic under the sickly light. He smelled of cheap vodka and desperation. "Where you going in such a hurry? Just want to talk." "Get off me," Lila spat, trying to yank her arm free. "Come on, don't be like that." He grabbed her other arm, his grip surprisingly strong, and shoved her back against the brick wall of a defunct laundromat. The impact knocked the wind out of her. "I just need some money. And maybe a little something else." His hand fumbled at the zipper of her sweatshirt. Lila panicked. She brought her knee up, hard, aiming for his groin, but he twisted, and she only caught his thigh. He grunted, his face contorting in anger. "You bitch," he hissed and raised his hand. Lila flinched, bracing for the slap. It never came. There was a sound, not a footstep, but a sudden, terrifying rush of air. A black shape detached itself from the shadows of the alley beside them. Dante? He wasn't on his bike. He must have followed her. The attacker didn't even have time to turn. Dante seized him by the back of the neck with one massive hand. The man made a choked, gurgling sound. Dante didn't hit him. He didn't shove him. He simply slammed the man's face, full force, into the brick wall. The sound was sickening, a wet, definitive crunch. The man collapsed instantly, a marionette with its strings cut, landing in a boneless heap on the sidewalk. He didn't move. Lila stared, her back pressed flat against the cold bricks, her entire body shaking so violently she could barely stand. Her breath came in short, painful gasps. Dante stood over the fallen man for a beat, his chest rising and falling. He was a creature of pure, cold violence. He nudged the man with his boot. A low groan answered him. Then, Dante turned to her. His face was a mask of cold fury, but when his eyes met hers, the fury was gone, replaced by that same intense, assessing stillness from the bar. He stepped toward her, and she flinched again, a purely reflexive motion. He stopped instantly. He held up his hands, palms out, as if approaching a spooked animal. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was still that low gravel, but it was softer now. Lila couldn't find her voice. She just shook her head, tears of shock and adrenaline stinging her eyes. He nodded once, a sharp, curt motion. His gaze flickered down the street, then back to her. "Where do you live?" Two blocks." She pointed with a trembling finger. He didn't speak again. He stepped closer, and this time she didn't flinch. He took her arm, not grabbing, but enclosing her elbow in a grip that was both gentle and unbreakable. He pulled her away from the wall, away from the man moaning on the pavement, and started walking. The 2 blocks were the longest of Lila's life. He walked beside her, a silent, towering wall of leather and muscle. He radiated a heat that cut through the damp night air. Lila was hyper-aware of everything. The rough texture of his leather jacket against her sweatshirt, the sheer size of his hand on her arm, the way he scanned the street, the rooftops, the dark alleys they passed. He was more dangerous than the man on the ground. She knew that, knew it with a certainty that chilled her to the bone. The man on the ground was desperate and sloppy. This man, Dante, was efficient. He was brutal, and he had just saved her. They reached the front stoop of her building, a run-down 3-story tenement with a buzzing fluorescent light in the lobby. She fumbled for her keys, her fingers still numb and shaking. I'm on the 3rd floor, she stammered, not knowing why she said it. He just nodded, watching her unlock the lobby door. She pushed it open and stepped inside, then turned back. She had to say something. "Thank you." He was standing on the sidewalk, half swallowed by the shadows. He looked at her, his dark eyes holding hers for a long, heavy moment. He gave another curt nod. Lila blinked, and when her eyes opened, he was gone. He hadn't walked away. He had simply vanished into the dark, as if he were made of it. Lila didn't sleep. She sat on her lumpy couch, wrapped in a blanket, until the sun came up, listening to the sounds of the city waking. She replayed the encounter over and over, the crunch of bone, the feeling of his hand on her arm, the way he had just disappeared. She finally dozed off around 7 in the morning and woke up 3 hours later, her neck stiff, her body sore. The terror of the night before had cooled into a dull, throbbing anxiety. She had to go to work. She showered, the hot water stinging her skin, and dressed in her usual jeans and a faded t-shirt. She went to her apartment door, bracing herself for the walk back to the bar. She reached for the cheap, flimsy knob lock. Her hand froze. The lock was new. It wasn't just the knob. Bolted to the peeling pane of her door was a heavy-duty, reinforced steel deadbolt, the metal bright and new. A matching strike plate had been expertly installed in the door jamb. Lila stared at it. She hadn't put it there. Her landlord wouldn't spend the money if the building was on fire. She touched the cold steel. There was no note, no message, but she knew. He knew where she lived. He knew which apartment was hers. And while she had been sitting on her couch, shaking, he had come back. He had stood outside this door, silently installing a lock to keep her safe. A shiver, entirely different from the night before, ran down her spine. It wasn't just fear. It was something else, something complicated and warm and terrifying. That night, the bar felt different. Every time the bell on the door jingled, her head snapped up, her heart jumping into her throat. She was jumpy, spilling drinks, fumbling change. He didn't come. 9 o'clock, 10, 11, at midnight, just as she was starting to relax, starting to believe he was gone for good. The bell jingled. Dante walked in. He didn't go to the corner booth. He walked straight to the bar and sat on a stool right in front of her. He was wearing a dark gray t-shirt, and the muscles in his arms and chest seemed even more pronounced without the heavy jacket. Lila's hands began to shake again. She wiped them on her apron. "Whiskey," he said, his voice just as she remembered. She grabbed a glass, her movements jerky. She poured, her hand unsteady, and slid it toward him. "You fixed my lock," she said. It wasn't a question. He didn't look up from the glass. He wrapped his large hand around it, his fingers dwarfing it. It was weak. "How did you know which apartment was mine? I watched you go in. You followed me inside? I made sure you were secure." He finally looked up, and his dark eyes pinned her. "Then I came back." Lila swallowed. You can't just follow me. You can't install things on my door. You assaulted a man." "He assaulted you," Dante corrected, his voice flat, impartial. "You almost killed him." "He's alive," Dante said, as if it were a minor inconvenience. He took a sip of the whiskey. "He won't bother you again." Lila stared at him, her mind a whirlwind of fear and a strange, powerful pull. He was a violent man, a stalker, a criminal. He was everything she should run from. But when he looked at her, she didn't feel like prey. She felt seen, protected. "Who are you?" she whispered, the question torn from her. "What are you?" Dante held her gaze. The subtle amusement from the night before was gone, replaced by something heavier, almost sad. "I'm the man you flirted with, Lila." He leaned in, just an inch, and the air between them became thick and electric. "You should be more careful." He finished his whiskey in one swallow, set the glass down with a heavy click, and dropped another $100 bill on the counter. "Don't walk home alone again," he said. And just like that, he was gone, the bell jingling his departure. Lila didn't move for a long time. She was torn, ripped in two by impulses she didn't understand. Half of her wanted to call the police, the other half wanted to run after him. She was terrified of him, and she was, God help her, attracted to him. That night, her dreams were vivid and suffocating. She wasn't in the alley, she was somewhere warm, somewhere dark. He was there. Dante. He was close. The scent of leather and whiskey and something uniquely him, something metallic and dangerous, filling her lungs. He wasn't touching her, but his presence was a physical weight, a shield around her. He was powerful. He was protective. In the dream, she wasn't afraid. She reached out, her hand tracing the hard line of his jaw. He didn't scowl. He just watched her, his dark eyes promising safety and ruin in equal measure. He leaned in, his breath hot on her lips. Lila woke up with a gasp, her heart pounding against her ribs. The room was empty, her new deadbolt securely fastened, but the feeling of him, the imagined touch, lingered on her skin. She was breathless, and she was utterly, terrifyingly confused. The dream of him clung to Lila like the humid Fairhaven air, thick and inescapable. She spent the next day in a fog of anxiety, her skin still prickling with the memory of his phantom touch. The new deadbolt on her door was a cold, hard reminder that none of it, the assault, the rescue, the silent protector, had been a dream. He was real, and he was terrifying. She went to the local library, a small, dusty building with fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. She sat at a beige computer terminal that smelled of hot plastic and typed Dante and Fairhaven into the search engine. Nothing. She tried Dante Biker. She got pages of motorcycle club forums and tattoo artists. None of them were him. His face, carved from stone and shadows, was nowhere to be found. He was a ghost, a man who could install a deadbolt in the dead of night without a sound and vanish before the sun rose. Frustrated, she went to work. The bar was mercifully slow. Sal, her only co-worker, was polishing glasses behind the counter. Sal was in her late 50s, with a face like a roadmap of bad decisions and a cloud of bleached blonde hair. "You look like hell, kid," Sal observed, not unkindly. "New boyfriend keeping you up?" Lila snorted, stacking clean mugs. "Something like that. Hey, Sal, you ever see that guy who was in here the last 2 nights? Big guy, black leather cut. Looks like he eats nails for breakfast." Sal's hands stopped moving. She set the glass down very, very carefully. Her gaze snapped to Lila's, sharp and suddenly sober. "Tall, dark hair, looks like he could kill you just by looking at you?" "Yeah, that's the one. He left me a really big tip." Sal leaned in, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper that cut through the noise of the rattling ice machine. "Lila, listen to me. You stay away from him. You see him. You walk the other way. You don't talk to him. You don't look at him. And you sure as hell don't take his money." Lila's stomach tightened. "Why? Who is he?" "He's not just a biker," Sal said, her eyes darting toward the door as if he might appear. "Those guys, the ones who wear club colors, they're messy, they're loud. This guy, he's quiet, he's clean, he's something else." "Something else like what?" "Like management, kid," Sal hissed. "Like the guys who own the guys who own the guys. He's not from around here. He's trouble. The kind of trouble that doesn't leave witnesses." A cold dread, heavier than anything she'd felt in the alley, settled over Lila. She thought of the new lock on her door. Not a kindness, a claim. Dante wasn't at the bar that night. He was 3 blocks away, standing in a freezing cold meat locker in the back of a defunct butcher shop. The air smelled of rust and ammonia. He held his phone clamped to his ear, his voice a low, furious growl that contrasted with the cold fog streaming from his lips. He was speaking Italian, the words fast and sharp. "Non mi interessa," he snapped into the phone. "I don't care about the orders. They put eyes on her." A tinny, angry voice squawked from the receiver. Dante paced, his heavy boots scraping the concrete floor. "It was sloppy," Dante continued, cutting the other man off. "This entire operation is sloppy. You wanted me to draw them out, fine. They're here. But they saw me with the girl." More yelling. Dante closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose. "She's innocent. She's not part of this. No, I will handle the cleanup. But la ragazza, the girl is my responsibility now. You send anyone near her. I don't care whose orders they have. I will send them back to the dawn in pieces. Do you understand me?" He didn't wait for an answer. He hung up. The silence of the meat locker pressing in on him. He had come to Fairhaven to be the bait, to lure Luca Greco's men into the open after their failed assassination attempt on his uncle. He was supposed to be isolated, a ghost. But he had walked into that bar. He had let her talk to him. He had let her sarcasm and her tired, unbroken spirit get under his skin. And in doing so, he had painted a target on her back. The next day, Lila tried to pretend everything was normal. She needed groceries. The sun was high, a weak, watery light that did little to warm the chilly autumn afternoon. She walked to the small market, her hoodie pulled up, her senses screaming. Sal's words echoed in her head, management. She kept telling herself she was paranoid. It was daylight. She was fine. She was in the produce aisle, squeezing an avocado. When they appeared, 2 of them. They didn't look like the wiry addict from the alley. These men were dressed well, in dark slacks and clean jackets. They looked like they belonged in a different city. "That's a nice avocado," the first one said, smiling. His teeth were too white. He stepped in front of her cart, blocking her path. "Excuse me," Lila said, trying to push past. "No need to rush," the second man said, coming up behind her. He was shorter, stockier, and smelled of expensive cologne. "A pretty girl like you shouldn't be shopping alone. You live around here?" Lila's blood ran cold. This wasn't a flirtation. It was an interrogation. Their eyes were cold, assessing, like sharks circling. "I have to go," she said, abandoning her cart. She turned and walked quickly toward the front door. They didn't follow. They just watched her. She pushed through the automatic door, gulping the cold air, and started walking fast, her heart hammering. She glanced over her shoulder. They weren't behind her. She let out a shaky breath, feeling foolish. She was just jumpy. Then she saw it, parked across the street, half a block down, the same black SUV that had been outside the bar the first night. It was idling, its dark windows reflecting the gray sky. She ran. She didn't know where she was going, just away. She sprinted down the sidewalk, her sneakers pounding the pavement. She heard a car door slam, then footsteps, heavy and fast, behind her. She risked another look. The two men from the market were chasing her. They were gaining. Lila screamed, a raw, terrified sound, and darted into an alley, hoping to cut through to the next street. It was a dead end. A chain-link fence topped with barbed wire blocked her way. She was trapped. She turned, her back hitting the cold, damp brick. The two men blocked the alley's entrance, breathing hard, but smiling now. Now, the first man said, straightening his jacket. That wasn't very polite. We just wanted to ask you some questions about your friend, the biker. I don't know what you're talking about, she panted, her eyes searching for a weapon, a rock, anything. Don't lie, the second man snarled, his polite mask gone. We know you've been with Dante Morelli. Where is he? Before Lila could answer, a sound ripped through the air, a deep, guttural roar that vibrated in her bones. A black motorcycle shot past the alley entrance, then screeched to a halt, the rear tire smoking. Dante. He was on the bike, his face a mask of cold fury, his eyes locked on the two men. The men froze, their smiles vanishing, replaced by shock and a flicker of genuine fear. Get on! Dante yelled at Lila. His voice wasn't a request. It was a command that sliced through her panic. She didn't hesitate. She scrambled past the two men, who seemed frozen by Dante's sudden appearance. He grabbed her arm, his grip like a steel vise, and hauled her onto the seat behind him. Hold on, he ordered. The first man lunged, pulling a gun from under his jacket. Dante didn't wait. He twisted the throttle, and the bike exploded forward, the force slamming Lila back. She wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face in the hard leather of his jacket. The bike leaned so far she thought they would crash, swinging out of the alley and onto the main street. A gunshot cracked the air, and Lila screamed again. The black SUV peeled out from the curb, accelerating to follow them. They're following us, they're shooting! Lila shrieked against his back. They won't hit us! He yelled back over the wind and the engine's roar. He swerved, cutting between a garbage truck and a city bus. The gap so narrow Lila felt her knee brush the side of the bus. The SUV was forced to slam on its brakes. Dante sped through the crumbling streets of Fairhaven, taking turns that seemed impossible. He raced down alleys, cut through a park, and finally shot onto an overpass leading out of the city. The wind tore at Lila, whipping her hair against her face, but she didn't care. She just clung to the solid, warm wall of his back. He didn't slow down for 20 minutes, until the rusted skeletons of Fairhaven's factories were just a brown smudge in the distance. He took her onto a clean, new highway, then exited into an affluent suburb she didn't recognize. The streets were wide, lined with trees and pristine brick buildings. He finally pulled into a private underground garage beneath a sleek, glass and steel high-rise. The gate closed behind them, sealing them in sterile, fluorescent silence. Dante cut the engine. The sudden quiet was deafening. Lila was shaking so hard she couldn't let go of him. Her arms were locked around his waist, her face still pressed into his back. He didn't move, and he just sat, letting her tremble. After a long minute, his hand, covered in a black leather glove, covered hers. "You're safe," he said. His voice was low, the gravelly rumble vibrating through his body into hers. "You can let go now, Lila." The adrenaline receded, and the rage flooded in. She shoved herself off the bike, stumbling as her feet hit the concrete. "Safe?" she yelled, her voice echoing in the garage. "You call that safe? I was just chased and shot at in the middle of the day. They knew your name. They knew my face." Dante swung his leg off the bike and stood, facing her. He pulled off his gloves, stuffing them into his pocket. "What is going on?" she demanded, shoving him in the chest. It was like shoving a statue. "Who are you? What did you do to me?" "I told you," he said, his voice quiet, which only made her angrier. "You should have been more careful." "Careful? I was working. I was flirting." Bartenders flirt, you asshole. It's part of the job. It's not supposed to get them killed. You didn't flirt with a bartender. Lila, he said, taking a step toward her. She stepped back. You flirted with the wrong man. Stop talking in riddles, she screamed, tears of frustration and terror finally breaking free. Tell me what's happening. He watched her for a long moment, his dark eyes cataloging her fear, her anger. He looked tired. My name, he said, his voice flat, is Dante Morelli. The name meant nothing to her. So, who is Dante Morelli? I'm an enforcer for the Morelli crime family. Lila's breath hitched. She stared at him, the words not making sense. Crime? Like the Mafia. You're telling me you're in the Mafia. That's not real. It's real, he said, and I'm currently being hunted by a rival syndicate, the men from the bar, the men at the market. They work for a man named Luca Greco. He wants me dead, and now they've seen you with me. Twice. The floor seemed to drop out from under her. Mafia, enforcer, hunted. This wasn't her life. This was a movie. But the memory of the gunshot, the cold eyes of the men in the market, was all too real. So what? She whispered, her anger collapsing into icy dread. So I'm a target? Because I teased you about your jacket? You're a loose end, he said, his honesty brutal. They think you know something, where I'm staying, who I'm meeting. They will use you to get to me, or they'll kill you to send me a message. Lila sank onto a concrete bench, her head in her hands. Oh, God, I'm dead. I'm going to die because I made a joke about your scowl. Dante crossed to her. He didn't sit. He crouched in front of her, forcing her to look at him. His proximity was overwhelming. He smelled of leather, gasoline, and that cold, metallic scent she remembered from her dreams. Look at me, he commanded. She raised her tear-streaked face. They won't, he said. They won't get near you again. No one will touch you while I'm breathing. Do you understand? It wasn't a comfort, it was a vow, sworn with a terrifying certainty. She believed him, and that scared her more than anything. He took her upstairs. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse apartment that was bigger than the entire floor of her building. It was all glass and white leather and polished chrome, sterile and cold, with a view of the distant city lights. A safe house. Lila was too numb to speak. She just stood in the center of the massive living room, dripping rainwater onto the white marble floor. There's a shower, Dante said, gesturing down a hall. Clothes in the closet. They're new. Go. Get warm. When she came out, an hour later, wrapped in a plush black bathrobe, she found him in the kitchen. He had shed his leather jacket and was in the same dark gray t-shirt from the bar. He was cooking. The sight was so bizarre. This mountain of lethal intensity standing at a stainless steel stove that she almost laughed. He was chopping vegetables, garlic, onions, tomatoes. He moved with the same efficient, precise grace he'd used in the alley. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. They were alone, trapped in this sterile box, miles above the world. He hadn't turned on any lights. Save for the one over the stove, the city skyline glowed beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. He didn't speak. He just cooked. He found a bottle of wine, opened it, and poured her a glass, setting it on the marble island. She took it, her fingers brushing his, a jolt, hot and sharp. Shot up her arm. He pulled his hand back quickly, his jaw tightening. They ate in silence. Sitting at the island, the pasta was simple, perfect. But Lila couldn't taste it. She was too aware of him. The way his muscles moved under his shirt, the way he watched her, even when he seemed to be looking away. The silence stretched, filled with unspoken fear and a raw, undeniable current of attraction. When they finished, he took her plate. She went to the window, looking down at the tiny, distant lights. "So what now?" she asked, her voice small. "Am I your prisoner?" "You're under my protection," he answered from behind her. "Until I finish this. Until Greco is handled, then you can go back to your life." She turned. "What life? You think I can go back to the bar? Back to my apartment? After this, I will make sure you are safe. Like you made me safe today," she shot back. His face darkened. "That was my mistake. It won't happen again." She didn't know what to do. She couldn't leave. She couldn't stay. She was trapped with this man who was equal parts monster and savior. That night, she couldn't sleep. The guest room bed was soft. The sheets had a high thread count. But her mind was racing. She could hear him. He wasn't sleeping. He was in the living room, moving, restless. Finally, just after 3 a.m, she got up. She padded down the dark hall, her heart thudding. She found him standing by the massive window, staring out at the city, a dark silhouette against the lights. "I can't sleep," she whispered. He turned. He looked exhausted, the lines on his face deeper than before. "Go back to bed. Lila, you're safe here." "I don't feel safe," she said, taking a step closer. I don't know what I feel, but I'm terrified, and when you..." She didn't know how to finish. She was standing only a few feet from him. The space between them crackled. "What?" he asked, his voice rough. "When you look at me," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I'm not scared of them. I'm scared of you. And I think I'm scared because I'm not as afraid as I should be." He didn't move. He just watched her, his black eyes unreadable. She took another step. "I just want to talk." It was a lie. She didn't know what she wanted. She wanted him to stop the world from spinning. She wanted to feel the safety his presence promised. He saw the lie. He saw the truth beneath it. "Talking is a bad idea," he said, his voice strained. "Why?" "Because," he said, and he closed the distance between them in one fast, fluid motion. His hands came up, not to touch her, but to hover on either side of her face, his palms radiating a searing heat. "Because I'm not the man you think I am. I'm not a good man. I'm not a protector. I'm the reason you're in danger." "I don't care," she whispered, leaning into his orbit. The dam broke. He didn't kiss her. He consumed her. His mouth crashed down on hers, and it wasn't gentle. It was a kiss of desperation, of starvation. It was all the tension of the last 3 days, all the fear and the adrenaline, exploding in a single, desperate moment. His hand tangled in her hair, gripping the back of her head, holding her steady as he deepened the kiss. Lila's hands flew up, grabbing the front of his t-shirt, clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing in the universe. She kissed him back with the same raw, mutual need. It wasn't soft. It was bruising, clumsy, and utterly necessary. It was a drowning person's gasp for air. It burned with a heat that scorched her from the inside out. He backed her against the wall, his body pressing hers into the cold glass. She could feel every hard line of his chest, the heavy thud of his heart against hers. His lips left hers, trailing fire along her jaw to the sensitive skin of her neck. Lila gasped, her head falling back, her fingers clenching in his shirt. Then, just as suddenly as it began, he froze. His whole body went rigid. He was breathing hard, his forehead pressed against hers. His eyes were closed. His jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped. "Dante," she whispered, her voice shaky. He pulled back, not slowly. He ripped himself away from her, stumbling back a few steps, his chest heaving. He looked at her, and the raw hunger in his eyes was replaced by a cold, devastating control. He looked broken. "I can't," he grated out. "What? You're not ready," he said, his voice soft but final. "Not ready for what? For you?" He looked away, turning back to the window, hiding his face in the shadows. "You're not ready for what this is. You're scared, and you're confusing that with something else." "I'm not," she argued, though she wasn't sure. "Go to bed, Lila," he said, his back to her. He was retreating, pulling the darkness around him like a shield. "Lock your door." Lila stood there for a long time, her lips still tingling, her body thrumming with an energy that had nowhere to go. She'd been terrified, yes, but what she had felt in his arms was not fear. It was the furthest thing from it. She turned and walked back to her room, the silence of the penthouse pressing in on her. She did as he said. She locked the door. Lila woke to the sterile silence of the penthouse, her lips still burning. His rejection, "You're not ready," echoed in her ears, a cold counterpoint to the memory of his desperate, consuming kiss. He was right. She wasn't ready. She wasn't ready to be a prisoner, wasn't ready to be collateral damage in a mafia war, and she certainly wasn't ready to desire the man who had put her in this position. Anger, cold and sharp, cut through her confusion. He had no right to drag her into this, no right to touch her like that, and no right to decide what she was ready for. She got out of bed, her bare feet padding on the cold marble floor. She didn't have a plan. She just knew she couldn't stay here, a bird in a gilded cage, waiting for him to decide her fate. She pulled on the jeans and sweater he had provided, the only clothes she had, and walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. Nothing happened. She pressed it again, holding it down. The panel remained dark. A spike of panic hit her. She looked around the vast, empty living room. Of course, he wouldn't just let her walk out. She found the stairwell door, a heavy steel slab painted to match the white walls. She grabbed the handle, and it opened. Relief surged through her, so strong it made her dizzy. She pulled it open and nearly collided with a man standing on the landing. He wasn't Dante. He was shorter, impeccably dressed in a dark suit with a neat haircut and an earpiece that seemed surgically attached. He didn't look surprised to see her. He looked bored. "Can I help you, Miss Reed?" he asked. His voice was polite, flat, with no trace of an accent. "I'm leaving," Lila said, trying to push past him. He didn't move. He simply blocked her path. A polite, immovable object. "I'm afraid that's not possible. You can't keep me here. This is kidnapping." The man almost smiled. "Actually, Miss Reed, this is protection. You're under Morelli protection now." The words hit her like a slap. Under protection. It sounded so much like under arrest. It meant she wasn't a guest. She was property. "Get out of my way," she seethed, shoving at his chest. He caught her wrist, his grip gentle but absolute. "Mister," Morelli gave strict orders. "You are not to leave the premises, for your own safety." "My safety," she cried, struggling against his grip. "My safety was fine until he walked into my life." The elevator chimed behind her. The doors slid open. Dante stood there. He was wearing his leather jacket, the dark aura of the outside world clinging to him. He looked cold, distant and dangerous. The man who had kissed her, the man who had pulled away, was gone. This was the enforcer. His dark eyes flicked from Lila's face to the man's hand on her wrist. "Let her go. Leo," Dante said, his voice a low rumble. Leo released her instantly, stepping back. "She was trying to leave, sir." "I'm aware," Dante said, his gaze fixed on Lila. Her skin prickled under the intensity of his stare. "She's coming with me." Lila rubbed her wrist, her defiance crumbling back into fear. "Coming with you where?" "I have business to attend to, and I can't leave you here." He nodded at Leo. "Wait here. Secure the floor. No one in or out." "Yes, sir," Leo said, melting back into the stairwell. Dante looked at Lila. "Let's go." It wasn't a request. She walked past him into the elevator, her shoulders tense, careful not to brush against him. The silence on the ride down to the garage was suffocating. He didn't look at her. He just stared at the steel doors, his jaw set, his presence filling the small space until Lila felt like she couldn't breathe. He didn't put her on the bike. He led her to a black sedan, the same model as the SUV that had chased her, but this one was civilian, clean, and anonymous. He opened the passenger door for her. She got in. They drove for nearly an hour, leaving the sterile suburbs and heading back toward the industrial corpse of Fairhaven. He didn't speak. Lila stared out the window, watching the broken factories and rusted chain-link fences roll by. He pulled into a vast, abandoned industrial park, the pavement cracked and overgrown with weeds. He stopped in front of a massive brick warehouse, its windows all shattered, its metal doors sagging on their hinges. "Wait here," he commanded, and got out of the car. Lila watched him walk to a small side door and knock. It opened, and he disappeared inside. Wait here. Like hell. She was not his prisoner. She was not his pet. And she was not going to sit in a car while he conducted his business. She got out, her sneakers crunching on the gravel. The air smelled of damp and rust. She followed him to the side door, which was slightly ajar. She pushed it open and slipped inside, her heart hammering. She was in a cavernous space. Weak afternoon light filtered through the grimy skylights high above, illuminating dust motes dancing in the cold air. Most of the warehouse was in shadow. From the far end, she heard voices. One voice was sharp, high-pitched with terror. The other was Dante's. It was calm, cold, and speaking Italian. Lila moved silently, hiding behind a mountain of rotting pallets. She crept closer until she could see. It was a small pool of light from a single, dangling work lamp. A man was tied to a steel chair. He was bloody and bruised. Lila recognized him instantly. He was one of the men from the market, the one with the 2 white teeth. Dante stood in front of him, perfectly calm. He was wiping something from his knuckles with a rag. "I will not ask again," Dante said, his voice conversational, as if he were asking for the time. "Who gave the order?" I told you." The man stammered, blood dripping from his lip. "It came from dispatch. We just got the call." "A new face in town with you. We were told to identify and retrieve." "Retrieve," Dante repeated, the word hanging in the cold air. He circled the chair, slow, like a shark. "You pulled a gun in broad daylight with a civilian." "We had orders from Luca," the man shrieked. Dante stopped behind him. "You're lying. Luca Greco is many things, but he is not stupid. He wouldn't order a street-level snatch and grab on my territory. He would send professionals." "He did." Dante sighed. He stepped back into the light, and Lila saw his face. It was blank, utterly devoid of emotion. That, she realized, was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. Not the anger from the alley, but this cold, empty void. "You weren't sent by Luca," Dante said softly. "You were freelancing. You thought you could grab the girl, get a bonus, make a name for yourselves." The man's eyes widened in terror. He knew he'd been caught. "No, please. Morelli, please. We just wanted—" Dante hit him. It wasn't a punch. It was a single, open-palmed slap. The sound was like a gunshot in the vast, empty building. It snapped the man's head to the side, and he slumped in the chair, sobbing. Lila clamped her hand over her mouth, stifling a gasp. Her stomach turned, and she fought back the bile rising in her throat. This was who he was. Not a protector, not a tortured soul, a monster, a cold, brutal monster. Dante crouched in front of the man. "I will find out who you're really working for. But for now, you're going to tell me every move Greco's men have made in this city for the last 2 weeks. He noticed her then. He didn't look up. He didn't flinch. He just tilted his head, his gaze shifting from the weeping man to the shadows where she was hiding. He had known she was there the entire time. His eyes found hers, and he held her gaze. He didn't look ashamed. He didn't look angry. He just looked. He was showing her, deliberately, what he was. Lila couldn't take it. She turned and fled, stumbling out of the warehouse, her lungs burning. She made it to the car before she was sick, collapsing against the fender, gasping for air. He emerged 10 minutes later, walking calmly, rolling down his sleeves. He looked clean, untouched. He got into the driver's seat. Lila scrambled back into her own, pressing herself against the door, as far away from him as she could get. The drive back to the penthouse was a tomb-like silence. Lila stared out the window, shaking, the sound of that slap replaying in her mind. When they got back, she went straight to the guest room. She started grabbing the few clothes he'd given her, stuffing them into a shopping bag. She had no money, no phone, or she didn't care. She would rather face Luca Greco's men than spend another second with him. "He was one of the men who tried to take you," Dante said from the doorway. Lila froze, her back to him. "He put a gun to your head," Dante continued, his voice flat. "He would have killed you, or worse, to get to me. He saw you as a thing, an object. And you?" she whispered, turning to face him. Her eyes were blazing with tears of disgust and fear. "What do you see me as? You tortured him. You enjoyed it." "Enjoyed it?" He let out a harsh, dry laugh that had no humor in it. "You think I enjoy that? That is my job. That is the filth I have to wade through to keep my family safe, to keep you safe." "Don't," she hissed. Don't you dare put this on me. I never asked for this. No, he agreed, stepping into the room. You didn't. He looked at her, and the cold mask from the warehouse was gone. In its place was a bone-deep weariness that seemed to pull at every line on his face. He looked broken. I'm not a good man, Lila, he said, his voice low and raw. I haven't been for a very long time. This life. You don't choose it. It chooses you. It wraps its roots around you until you can't tell where you end and it begins. He ran a hand over his face, his gaze dropping to the floor. I was supposed to be something else. I was supposed to be better. He looked up, and his eyes were filled with a pain so deep it made her ache. You remind me of her, of someone I couldn't save. She was good. She saw the good in me, even when it was long gone, and she paid the price for it. He was confessing, not to a priest, but to her. He was showing her the man beneath the monster. Lila's anger began to dissolve, replaced by a cold, familiar ache. She knew this brand of pain. She had lived with it her whole life. I get it, she said, and her voice quiet. She dropped the bag. You think you're the only one who's broken. She sank onto the edge of the bed. I grew up in foster care. I was bounced around so much I stopped unpacking. I learned that people are either temporary or they're dangerous. That trust is just a word for the weapon you give someone to hurt you. She looked at her hands, her own scars. I had a brother, my younger brother. He was the only person He was the one I was supposed to protect, but the system split us up. I found him years later. He was on the street, drugs. He was too far gone. He died last winter, alone, and I wasn't there. She finally looked up at him, her vision blurred. So don't talk to me about failing to save people. Don't talk to me about being a monster. We're all just what's left over. The silence in the room was no longer cold. It was heavy, thick with their shared, unspoken grief. Two broken, jagged pieces, laid bare. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He didn't reach for her. He just sank to his knees in front of her, so she was looking down at him. He placed his hands on her knees, his touch gentle, a stark contrast to the violence she had witnessed. Lila, he whispered, and her name sounded like a prayer. She looked into his dark eyes, and she didn't see a monster. She saw a man, just as lost and just as scarred as she was. Her emotional walls didn't just break, they shattered. She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched his face. Her fingers grazed the stubble on his jaw, the hard line of his cheek. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch like a man starving for it. He took her hand from his face and pressed his lips to her palm, a kiss that was so tender, so full of reverence. It unraveled her. I'm not her, she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. I know, he breathed, his lips moving against her skin. You're so much stronger. He rose, pulling her up with him. He didn't kiss her mouth. He rested his forehead against hers, his hands framing her face. They just stood there, breathing each other in, a stormy, tender silence. This wasn't the frantic, desperate clash from the night before. This was a conscious, deliberate surrender. It was giving her a choice. It was letting her see all of him, the killer and the penitent, and he was letting her decide. Lila made the choice. She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft, questioning. He responded instantly, his mouth moving against hers with a deep, unspoken emotion. It was a kiss of acceptance, a kiss that said, I see you. I'm broken, too. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her flush against him. She melted into his strength, her hands sliding up his chest to circle his neck. This was what she had craved. Not just the passion, but this, the feeling of being held, the feeling of safety, even in the arms of the most dangerous man she'd ever met. He lifted her, his mouth never leaving hers, and carried her to the bed. He laid her down gently, following her, his body covering hers, a warm, protective weight. He looked down at her, his dark eyes searching hers, asking a final question. She answered by pulling his head down to hers. It was slow, and it was deep. It was a raw, passionate exploration of two people seeking refuge. Every touch was electric, a silent communication. His hands were reverent, tracing the line of her jaw, her neck, the curve of her hip, as if he were memorizing her. She clung to him, her fingers digging into the hard muscle of his back, anchoring herself to him. It was a collision of need, a desperate, unspoken promise that for this one night, in this one moment, they were not alone. They were not broken. They were just two people finding a fragile safety in each other's arms. Later, they lay tangled in the sheets, the city lights a distant, glittering tapestry beyond the window. The storm had passed, leaving a quiet, breathless peace. Lila lay with her head on his chest, her fingers idly tracing the network of scars on his torso. There were so many. A small, puckered circle on his shoulder, a long, thin line that ran along his ribs. She touched it, her fingertip following the raised skin. "Knife," he said, his voice a low rumble beneath her ear. She didn't ask. She didn't need to know the details. They were a part of him, the physical map of the life he lived. He captured her hand, lacing his fingers with hers, and brought her knuckles to his lips. He kissed each one, a gesture so tender, so reverent. It made her chest ache. He held her hand against his heart, and she lay there, listening to it beat, steady and strong beneath her. The moment was perfect, fragile. And, of course, it was interrupted. A phone buzzed on the nightstand, a harsh, electronic violation of their sanctuary. Dante tensed. Ignoring it, it buzzed again, insistent, with a muttered curse. He untangled himself from her and grabbed the phone. He looked at the screen, and his entire body went rigid. He got out of bed, walking to the window, turning his back to her. "Leo." "What?" Lila sat up, pulling the sheet around her, a sudden cold seeping into her skin. Dante's voice was low, but she heard the ice in it, even from across the room. "What did you say?" "How?" "Send it to me. Now." He was silent for a long moment. Lila could see the muscles in his back bunching. He turned around. The tenderness, the vulnerability, the man who had kissed her scars, was gone. The enforcer was back. His face was a mask of cold, lethal fury. "Get dressed," he said. "Dante, what is it? What's wrong?" He walked to the chair, grabbing his shirt. "I told Leo to scrub your identity, to wipe you from every camera in Fairhaven, but they were too fast." He looked at her, his eyes as cold and hard as obsidian. "Your face has been posted on a dark web forum. A bounty has been placed, $500,000 for the girl who's with Dante Morelli." He finished buttoning his shirt, his movements quick and precise. "We move tonight." The sterile peace of the penthouse shattered. "We move tonight" was not a suggestion. It was a sentence. The tender man who had held her, who had kissed her scars, vanished. In his place was a cold, efficient machine. Dante moved with a frightening economy of motion, pulling on his boots, checking the slide on a pistol he retrieved from a hidden safe, his face an impenetrable mask of ice. Lila scrambled into her clothes, her fingers fumbling with the zipper, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest, a bounty, $500,000, her face, her name, passed around in the digital shadows by men who would kill her for money. She was no longer just a loose end. She was a prize. "Stay behind me. Do not speak. Do not look at anyone. Understand?" Dante's voice was a low growl. She just nodded, her throat too tight to form words. He led her to the garage, not to the sedan, but to a different vehicle parked in a dark corner. It was a reinforced, matte black van, its windows tinted to blackness. Leo was at the wheel, his bored expression replaced with a tense, watchful energy. Dante put her in the back, a windowless compartment with a single bench. He climbed in after her and sealed the door. They were plunged into absolute darkness, broken only by the dim red glow of a single console light. The engine rumbled to life, and the van moved, ascending a ramp Lila hadn't seen before. It didn't take them to the street. It took them into a service tunnel. Lila was pressed against the cold metal wall, the van's movements jolting her. Dante sat across from her, a dark, broad-shouldered silhouette. He was perfectly still. "Where are we going?" she finally whispered into the dark. "Underground," he said. His voice was just a vibration in the darkness. "The city you know, the one with the cracked sidewalks and the dead factories. It's just a crust. Underneath, that's where the real power is. That's my world. And it's the only place I can keep you safe now." The drive was long, maybe 30 minutes, filled with the rumble of the engine and the sound of heavy, unseen gates opening and closing. They were descending. When the van finally stopped, the air felt different, thick, heavy. The door slid open. Lila blinked against the sudden, dim light. They were in a vast, subterranean garage, the air smelling of damp concrete, cigar smoke, and unburned gasoline. It was full of high-end cars, all black, all clean. Men in dark suits moved purposefully. They all carried weapons, not concealed, but worn openly in shoulder holsters. They nodded as Dante stepped out, their expressions a mixture of deference and respect. "Signore Morelli." This was not Fairhaven. This was a fortress. Dante took her arm, his grip firm, pulling her from the van. He led her through a steel door, into a corridor, and the world changed. The damp concrete gave way to rich, dark wood paneling and worn, oriental rugs. The air was warmer, smelling of aged whiskey, roasted coffee, and power. It felt like an old, exclusive club, the kind that had no name on the door. Men and a few women passed them, their conversations in Italian stopping as they saw Dante, their eyes flicking to Lila with undisguised curiosity. She was an alien here, a piece of flotsam washed into a king's court. She saw the loyalty in their eyes as they greeted Dante. She saw the violence in the hard, watchful way they held themselves, and she felt the power, humming in the walls like a live current. "Dante," a voice called. A man approached, older, with silver hair and a perfectly tailored suit. He embraced Dante, clapping him on the back. "Nico," Dante said, his voice relaxing for the first time. "A bad night to be in town." "They say you've stirred the hornet's nest," Nico said, his eyes, sharp and intelligent, landing on Lila. "And this is the reason. This is Lila," Dante said, his voice flat, a clear warning. "She is under my protection. She's not to be touched. She's not to be questioned." Nico's eyebrows rose, but he just nodded, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "He's brought you into the heart of the family. Child, you are safer here than anywhere in the world, and in more danger than you can possibly imagine." Dante pulled her forward. "The meeting. They're waiting. The old men are agitated. Greco's move was public. It's a breach of the old codes," Nico said. He gestured down the hall. "She can wait in my office. She'll be comfortable." "No," Dante said, not looking at her. "She stays where I can see her." He led her to a set of heavy, carved oak doors. He pushed them open, and the hum of conversation stopped. The room was vast, a library or a smoking lounge, filled with at least 20 men, all older, all dressed in expensive suits. They sat in high-backed leather chairs, smoke curling around their heads. They were the heads of the families, the capos, the old men who ran this hidden world, and they were all looking at him. Dante didn't hesitate. He walked into the center of the room, and Lila slipped into a small alcove by the door, trying to disappear. She watched him. He wasn't the brute from the warehouse, or the silent protector from the alley, or even the tender, broken man from the penthouse. This was someone new. He stood among these grizzled yet powerful men, and he was the one who commanded the room. He spoke, his voice calm, resonant, filling the space. He didn't shout, he didn't posture. He laid out his plan, his words cutting through their arguments. He spoke of logistics, of supply lines, of Greco's weaknesses. He was a general. He was a strategist. He was a king. Lila watched, mesmerized. This was his world. This was who he was, not just an enforcer, a leader. He held them all in the palm of his hand, his power not coming from his fists, but from his presence, his certainty. A woman moved from the back of the room, gliding to Dante's side. She was beautiful, sleek and dark, wearing a black dress that clung to her. She looked like she belonged, a panther in her native jungle. She refilled Dante's glass of water, her hand lingering on his arm, her red-painted lips whispering something close to his ear. Dante didn't pull away. He just nodded, answering her whispered comment with a small, tight smile before turning back to the room. Lila felt a hot, ugly spike of jealousy lance through her. It was so potent it made her stomach clench. She looked down at her borrowed, rumpled clothes, at her scuffed sneakers. She was a bartender. That woman was a queen, a match for the king he was in this room. Lila was just baggage, a bounty. She crossed her arms, rubbing the sudden chill from her skin, and looked away. The meeting broke an hour later. The men filed out, patting Dante's shoulder, their earlier agitation replaced by a grim resolve. The woman in black lingered, touching Dante's lapel. "Be careful, Dante," she murmured, her voice a low purr. "Luca plays dirty. I played dirtier. Sophia," he replied, his voice detached. Sophia's dark eyes slid over to the alcove, finding Lila. She appraised her, from her messy hair to her worn-out shoes, and a small, dismissive smile touched her lips. Then she turned and glided from the room. Dante was the last one left. He stood for a moment, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off the weight of the meeting. Then he turned and walked toward Lila. She pushed herself out of the alcove, her jealousy making her angry. "So, is she part of the protection?" Dante stopped, a flicker of genuine surprise on his face. Then, it was replaced by a slow, dangerous amusement. "Sophia? She seems helpful," Lila said, unable to keep the acid from her voice. He stepped closer, backing her against the wall, the same way he had in the penthouse. But this wasn't the penthouse. The air here was charged with adrenaline and power. He placed one hand on the wall beside her head, caging her in. "She's a cousin," he said, his voice a low rumble. "And she runs our finances. Does that bother you, Lila?" "No," she lied, her heart hammering. "Why would it bother me? I'm just the girl, the one with the price tag." "That's right," he whispered, leaning in. His amusement was gone, replaced by that raw, familiar intensity. "You are. And you were watching her like you wanted to set her on fire. I was not. You were," he teased, his face just inches from hers. "Your knuckles were white. You're imagining things." "Am I?" His other hand came up to her jaw, his thumb brushing her lower lip. The rough, calloused pat of his skin sent a jolt straight through her. "Or are you finally realizing that this isn't a game?" The chemistry, which had been simmering under the fear and the jealousy, exploded. It flared between them, hot and undeniable. He was right. She had been jealous. She had seen that woman touch him and had wanted to tear her hand away. "You're not just my protector, are you?" she whispered, her anger fading into a breathless realization. "No," he growled. He kissed her. It wasn't soft. It wasn't tender. It was rough. A desperate, possessive claiming. It was fueled by the danger, by the bounty, by her jealousy, and by his relief at seeing her safe. His mouth was hard on hers, taking, demanding. He kissed her like he was staking a claim, branding her as his in this dark, violent world. Lila's hands grabbed the front of his jacket, clinging to him. She kissed him back with the same desperate, frantic energy. This was not a surrender. It was a collision. He tasted of whiskey and coffee and power, and she couldn't get enough. He broke the kiss, both of them breathing hard, their foreheads resting against each other. I don't," Lila stammered, her thoughts a whirlwind. "Dante, I don't want to be just another girl. Not one of them." She meant Sophia. She meant any of them. His expression softened. The hard lines of the enforcer eased, and she saw the man from the penthouse, the one who had held her hand. He took her face between both of his gaze intense, pinning her. "You are not," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. "You are not. Lila, you are the first thing that's felt real in a decade." He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise. "Now let's get you somewhere safe. The night's not over." He took her to a room deep within the compound, a Spartan but secure bedroom with reinforced walls and a heavy, thick door. He locked it. He checked the windows, which were small, high and barred. Exhaustion suddenly hit Lila like a physical blow. The day's events crashed down on her. Dante saw it. "Get some sleep," he said, his voice gentle. "I have to make some calls. I'll be in the outer room. No one will get through that door." She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him to stay, but she just nodded, her body too heavy to move. She collapsed onto the bed, still in her clothes, and was asleep almost instantly. She woke to chaos. It wasn't a sound that woke her, but a vibration, a low, shuddering impact that shook the walls, then shouting, distant, then closer, gunfire. Not a single shot, but a barrage, the high-pitched crack of pistols and the heavier, tearing sound of automatic weapons. The door to her room burst open, and Dante was there, his gun in his hand, his face a mask of cold fury. "They're here. They're inside." He grabbed her, yanking her out of bed. "Stay behind me." He shoved her into the outer room just as the wall they had been standing next to exploded in a shower of plaster and shrapnel. Bullets ripped through the room. "Down," he roared, tackling her, shielding her body with his own as the world dissolved into noise and dust. Lila screamed as plaster rained down on them. Dante's body was a solid, immovable weight, protecting her from the debris. He grunted, a sharp, pained sound that cut through the noise. "Are you hit?" she cried. "I'm fine," he growled, but she felt the sudden, hot wetness soaking through his shirt onto her shoulder. He was lying. "Dante, we have to move. Now!" He grabbed her hand, hauling her to her feet, and shoved her toward a dark panel in the wall. He slammed his palm against it, and it slid open, revealing a dark, narrow opening. "The tunnels," he panted, shoving her inside. "Go! Go!" He scrambled in after her, pulling the door shut just as another burst of gunfire stitched the wall where they had been. They were in total darkness. The air was cold, smelling of damp earth and mold. Lila was shaking so hard she could barely stand. Dante grabbed her hand, his grip like a steel trap. "I know the way. Don't let go of me," he ordered, and started to run, pulling her with him. They ran. They stumbled through the claustrophobic darkness, their footsteps echoing. Behind them, they could hear muffled shouts and the occasional burst of gunfire, growing fainter and fainter. They ran until Lila's lungs were on fire and her legs felt like jelly. Finally, Dante pulled her into a small alcove, a maintenance junction, and sagged against the wall, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. A single, weak emergency bulb glowed from the ceiling, casting a sickly yellow light. Lila saw the blood. It was soaking his entire left side, from his shoulder down his ribs. His shirt was shredded. "Oh, God," she breathed, her adrenaline turning to icy fear. "You're hit. You lied. It's a graze." He grunted, sliding down the wall to sit on the floor, his gun still clutched in his hand. "A graze! Dante, you're bleeding everywhere!" She ripped off her sweater, leaving her in her thin t-shirt, and tore a long strip from it. Her hands were shaking violently, but she moved, driven by a purpose she didn't know she had. She knelt in front of him, pushing his jacket and shredded shirt aside. It was a long, ugly gash along his side, deep and weeping blood. He had taken the shrapnel or the bullets that had been meant for her. "Hold this," she ordered, her voice trembling but firm. She pressed the wad of fabric against the wound. He winced, hissing through his teeth, but did as he was told, pressing his hand over hers. They were both shaking. Him from blood loss and shock, her from adrenaline and terror. They were alone, in a dark hole, while a war raged above them. She looked at his face. He was pale in the yellow light, beaded with sweat, but his eyes were fixed on her, alert and intense. "Don't die on me," she whispered, the words torn from her. "You can't. Not now." A slow, painful smile touched his lips. He lifted his free hand, his fingers smeared with his own blood, and cupped her face. He brushed his thumb over her cheek, leaving a crimson streak. "Not when you just started seeing me," he whispered back, his voice rough. The words, his touch, the sheer terrifying intimacy of the moment broke something inside her. The fear, the adrenaline, the desperation, it all melted away, replaced by a profound, aching need. He was bleeding for her. He had shielded her. He was her only anchor in this madness. She leaned in, her hands sticky with his blood, framing his face. He met her, his good arm wrapping around her waist, pulling her closer until she was half in his lap, kneeling in the filth of the tunnel floor. He kissed her, and this time, it was different again. It was not the desperate crash of the penthouse or the possessive claim of the corridor. This was slow, deep. It was a kiss that tasted of blood and fear and a desperate, clinging need to be alive. It was a vow. He pulled back, his breath warm on her lips. "Lila," he breathed, his eyes searching hers. She saw him then. Not the king, not the killer. She saw the vulnerable man beneath the brutal mask, a man who was hurt, bleeding, and looking at her like she was the only thing holding him together. She didn't need to speak. She just lowered her head, pressing her lips to his throat, to his collarbone. Her answer clear in the darkness. He guided her, his hands unsteady but sure, and in the cold, damp silence of the tunnel, surrounded by death. They clung to life, their movements slow and deep, a desperate, profound affirmation that they were still there, still breathing. The dim emergency light of the tunnel cast their shadows long and twisted. The silence that followed their desperate, life-affirming act was heavier than the darkness. Dante's breathing was shallow, his face pale and slick with sweat, but his eyes were clear, fixed on her. The war was still raging somewhere above them, but in this damp, cold hole, there was only the sound of their breath and the slow, steady drip of his blood onto the concrete. "We have to go," he finally rasped, the words pulling a wince from him. He used the wall to push himself, slowly, to his feet. Lila scrambled up, her hands still sticky with his blood. "You can barely stand. You need a doctor, not a fight. I need to end this," he said. The coldness was back, a sheet of ice forming over the vulnerable man she had just held. This wasn't about the compound. This wasn't about the bounty. This was about the ambush. Luca Greco had dared to attack him on his own ground, had put his hands on what was his. "He's not just hunting me anymore. He's hunting you. And that stops tonight." He led her through another hour of twisting tunnels, a dark labyrinth beneath the city, until they emerged into another, smaller safe house. This one was a reinforced concrete bunker, hidden beneath an old church. Nico, the older man with the silver hair, was there, along with 2 guards. Their faces were grim. "The compound is lost," Nico said, his voice heavy as he helped Dante into a chair. "They came in through the old aqueducts, an inside job. We lost 6 men. Dante's face was stone. He said nothing, just gritted his teeth as Nico cut away the bloody remnants of his shirt and began cleaning the long, deep gash on his side. It was worse than a graze. Lila could see the dark, torn muscle beneath. "You're done for tonight, Dante," Nico said, his hands surprisingly steady, working with practiced skill. "You've lost too much blood. You need stitches. You need rest." "I need Luca Greco," Dante stated, his voice flat. He didn't even flinch as Nico poured antiseptic into the wound. "Get me the car and get her secure. I want 2 men on her door until I get back." "No," Lila said. Both men looked at her. "No," she repeated, her voice stronger. She stepped forward. "I'm not sitting in another locked room, waiting to find out if you're dead or alive. I am not some package you're protecting. That bounty is on my head. I am in this. Dante, you don't get to make that choice for me anymore." Dante looked up from the chair, his dark eyes blazing. "You are not coming. You've seen what I am. You've seen what they do. This is not a debate. This is the end of the line for you." His voice was absolute, the command of a king. "You will stay here. You will be safe. I will end him, and then we will talk." He stood, swaying slightly as Nico finished a tight pressure bandage. He pulled on a fresh black shirt, wincing as it pulled against his side. He picked up his gun from the table. "Dante, please," she begged, grabbing his arm. "Don't do this. He's expecting you. He's waiting." He looked down at her hand on his arm. He covered it with his grip firm. He didn't kiss her. He just looked at her, his face a mask of cold resolve. "He's been waiting for years. I'm not going to make him wait any longer." He pulled his arm free and walked out of the room. The heavy steel door of the bunker clanged shut, the sound of the deadbolt sliding home echoing in the small room. It was final. Lila was alone with Nico. The old man sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. He looked at her, his eyes full of a sad, tired wisdom. "He's right, Nico said quietly. "This is not a fight for you. This is personal. It goes back a long time." "He's wounded," Lila said, her mind racing. "He's not thinking clearly. He's going to get himself killed." "He is Dante Morelli," Nico said, as if that explained everything. "He doesn't get killed. Now, let me get you some water." He left her, moving to a small kitchenette in the corner. Lila stared at the steel door. She couldn't. She wouldn't be his weakness. She wouldn't be the woman he died protecting. One of the 2 guards posted outside the door stepped in. He was young, barely 20, his face pale and set. He looked at her, then at Nico's back. He moved quickly, pulling a small black pistol from the ankle holster hidden beneath his pants. He pressed it into her hand. It was heavy and cold. "He'll kill me if he knows I gave you this," the guard whispered, his voice shaking. "But he'll be dead if you don't go. Nico is right. This is personal. Greco, he's baiting him. Dante isn't walking into a meeting. He's walking into an execution." Lila stared at the gun, then at the guard. "Where?" "The old shipyard. Warehouse 7. He's taking the GTO. I left the keys in the black sedan in the garage. It's the only other car. Go. Go now, before Nico turns around." Lila didn't hesitate. She shoved the pistol into the waistband of her jeans, at the small of her back. "Thank you." She slipped past the guard, through a secondary exit he pointed to, and into a cold, dark garage. The black sedan was there, keys dangling. Her hands were shaking, but a cold, sharp purpose cut through her fear. She was done being protected. She was done being afraid. She drove, her mind a blank, following the signs for the shipyards. She knew the area, a wasteland of rust and decay on the edge of the river. She parked the car a quarter-mile away and ran, the cold night air burning her lungs. Warehouse 7 was a colossal, skeletal building, its corrugated metal walls bleeding rust. It was silent. No guards, no cars, just the sound of the river lapping against the rotting piers. Lila found a side door, its lock rusted open. She slipped inside. It was vast, a tomb for dead machinery. The only light came from a single, bright spotlight in the center of the floor, illuminating a small circle. She saw Dante's car, the GTO, parked in the shadows. High above, a network of metal catwalks and old loading offices lined the walls. She found a set of stairs and climbed, her sneakers silent on the metal. She moved into the shadows of a dark, glass-fronted office, its windows shattered. She had a clear view of the entire floor. Dante was not alone. He stood in the center of the light, his hands loose at his sides. His wounded side was visible, the black shirt already dark with fresh blood. Facing him, sitting casually on a stack of crates, was Luca Greco. He was handsome, charismatic, wearing a suit that was worth more than her old apartment. He was flanked by 4 men, all armed, all watching Dante. "Dante, Dante, Dante," Luca said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. He clapped slowly. "You came, wounded, alone. I have to say, I'm disappointed. I expected more. A small army, perhaps? Not just you. I'm all you get, Luca." Dante's voice was a low growl, devoid of emotion. "And I'm all you've ever wanted." Luca smiled, standing. He walked into the light, swirling a glass of amber liquid. I was wondering what it would take to finally draw you out of your uncle's shadow. The assassination attempt was imprecise, but a girl? A cheap, Rust Belt bartender? That's all it took to break the legendary Dante Morelli? You put a price on her head," Dante said. "You broke the code." "Code," Luca laughed, a high, barking sound. "There is no code. There is only what you can take and what you can hold. You, of all people, should know that. You took everything from me. My territory, my respect. So I took something from you." Dante's stillness was terrifying. He didn't move. He just watched. "You've got a new girl," Luca taunted, taking a sip of his drink. I hear she's pretty. Does she know what happened to the last one? Does she know about Elena? Lila's breath caught. She saw Dante's hand clench. Just once. Ah, there it is, Luca hissed, his charming mask slipping, revealing the viper beneath. You never told this new one, did you? You never told her how your fiancé died. Dante said nothing. That was me, Luca whispered, stepping closer to Dante, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. My first real masterpiece. Before I had all this, he gestured to his men, his suit. I was just a kid, trying to make a name, and you humiliated me. You broke my brother's legs in front of his crew. He leaned in. So I took her. Elena, she was so beautiful, all that dark hair, and she screamed so loudly, Dante, begging for you. It took her hours to die. I was very thorough. A raw, inhuman sound tore itself from Dante's throat. It wasn't a shout. It was a roar of pure, distilled rage. He didn't reach for his gun. He lunged, closing the 10 feet between them in a single, blurring motion. He was a creature of pure, animalistic violence. The warehouse exploded. Luca's men opened fire. From the shadows near Dante's car, 2 of Dante's own men, Leo and the guard from the bunker, returned fire. It was an ambush within an ambush. Gunshots echoed like thunder, bright muzzle flashes illuminating the chaos. Lila screamed, pressing herself against the wall. Dante ignored the bullets. He slammed into Luca, his momentum carrying them both to the ground. He was a dervish of fury, his fists landing with sickening, wet crunches. But Luca was a fighter, too. He rolled, pulling a knife, and slashed, opening a new gash on Dante's arm. Below them, the gunfight was fast and brutal. Leo shot one of Luca's men. The other guard went down, clutching his leg. Dante was on top of Luca, his hands around the other man's throat, but his wounded side was failing him. He was losing strength. One of Luca's men, the last one standing besides the one fighting Leo, saw his boss's predicament. He was on the flank, hidden from Dante's view, shielded by a stack of barrels. He raised his pistol, taking careful aim at the center of Dante's back. Lila saw it. Everything went silent. There was no time. There was no fear. There was only Dante. Her hands were steady. She remembered the weight of the gun, the cold steel. She pulled it from her waistband, her arms snapping out, her grip firm, just like she'd seen in movies. She pointed, she fired. The sound was deafening, the recoil slamming her arm back. The man cried out, a high, sharp sound. He staggered back, clutching his shoulder, his shot going wild, sparking off the concrete floor. The shot cracked through the chaos. Dante, his hand still on Luca's throat, looked up, his eyes finding her instantly in the dark office. He saw her, holding the smoking pistol, her face a pale oval in the gloom. Shock, rage, and something else. Awe. That 1 second, that single, shared glance, was all it took. Luca, taking advantage of the distraction, shoved Dante off and scrambled for his gun, which had fallen nearby, but Dante was faster. His own pistol was in his hand. He didn't look at Luca. He was already moving. His body a fluid, trained weapon, 3 shots, fast, precise, center mass. Luca Greco's body jerked, his eyes wide with surprise. He looked down at the 3 dark, blossoming stains on his expensive suit. He fell backward and did not move again. Leo took down the last man. Silence. The only sound was the drip of water, the distant river and the ragged, painful gasping of Dante's breath. Leo ran to him. "Boss, you're hit, mate!" Dante waved him off. Pushing himself to his feet, he stood over Luca's body, his chest heaving, blood dripping from his side, his arm, his knuckles. He was a portrait of brutal, bloody victory. The war was over. He looked up. His gaze locked on the office, on Lila. He didn't shout. He didn't move. He just watched her. Back at the penthouse, not the sterile one, but the real one. The one deep in the new compound. The adrenaline was gone, leaving behind a deep, aching exhaustion that felt like it had settled into their bones. Dante was shirtless on the edge of the bed. The bunker had been secured, the traitors dealt with. The war was done. Lila was cleaning his wounds. Her hands were steady now. She had put stitches in his side, her movements surprisingly deft, copying what she had seen Nico do. She was no longer shaking. She was no longer the bartender from Fairhaven. He had not spoken since the warehouse, not a single word. He had just pulled her from the office, put her in his car, and driven them back. His silence, a heavy, suffocating blanket. She finished taping the last white bandage against his skin. His body was a roadmap of violence, new and old. He was still for a long, quiet minute. Then, he reached out. His hand, bruised and split, gentle, cupped the back of her neck. He pulled her to him. She went, straddling his lap, her knees on either side of his hips. He didn't kiss her. He just buried his face in the curve of her neck, his arms wrapping around her waist, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. He held her like she was all that was left in the world, the only solid thing. She felt the dampness of his tears against her skin, and her own eyes burned. He stayed that way for a long time, just breathing her in. Finally, he spoke, his voice muffled against her skin, rough and broken. "I thought I buried my heart," he whispered. "I buried it with Elena, in a box deep in the ground. I thought it was gone for good. Then you walked into that bar, wearing sarcasm and cheap perfume, and you dug it right back up." A wet, broken laugh escaped Lila's throat. She pulled back, just enough to look at him. His face was a mess of bruises and exhaustion, his eyes raw. "Cheap perfume?" she whispered, her own tears tracing paths through the grime on her cheeks. "You asshole!" A small, painful smile touched his lips. It was the first real smile she had ever seen from him. He laughed, a short, rough bark of air. They both laughed, a low, exhausted, broken sound that was more relief than humor. The sound of two people who had walked through hell and found each other on the other side. She sobered, her hand coming up to touch the dark bruise on his cheekbone. "I'm not scared anymore. Dante," she said, and she meant it. She'd seen the worst of his world, the worst of him, and she had fired a gun to protect him. The fear was gone. He looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face. The smile faded, replaced by that familiar, devastating intensity. He captured her hand, kissing her blood-stained fingers, one by one. "That's dangerous," he replied, his voice a low growl. "I like that." The news of Luca Greco's death spread through the underworld like a shockwave, and the war ended not with a treaty, but with a sudden, definitive silence. Dante's brutal, decisive victory at the shipyard, coupled with the revelation of an internal breach, solidified his power in a way years of simple enforcement never could have. But it was the other story, the one whispered in the secure rooms and over encrypted lines, that truly changed the game, the story of the girl. 2 weeks later, Dante stood at the head of a long, polished mahogany table. This was the true inner sanctum of the Morelli power structure, a room deep beneath a legitimate import-export business that had never seen a tax auditor. The old men were there, the capos, along with Nico and Sophia, the cousin who ran the finances. Lila was there too. She stood not behind him, but beside him, at his right hand. She had traded her borrowed clothes for a simple, dark dress that was both elegant and severe. Her hair was pulled back, and her face, though still bearing the faint shadow of her ordeal, was composed, her eyes clear and steady. She was no longer the jumpy bartender from Fairhaven. She was the woman who had survived, Nico, acting as the family consigliere, Rose. His voice filled the quiet, smoke-free room. "It is done," Nico announced, his voice formal. "The Greco territory has been absorbed. The traitors have been retired. The family is whole." He turned, his gaze landing on Lila. It was not a warm look, but it was one of respect. "But we are here for one final piece of business, the status of Lila Reed." A murmur went around the table. They all looked at her. She was an outsider, a civilian, a woman who had seen everything in their world. That made her a liability. "She is an asset," Sophia said, her voice cool and appraising. She, too, looked at Lila differently now. The dismissive glance from their first meeting was gone. "She is more than an asset," Nico corrected, a small smile touching his lips. She is the woman who held a gun. She is the woman who saved the life of Dante Morelli." He raised his glass. "By order of the Don himself, and by the right of blood she helped to spill, we declare Lila Reed to be under the full protection of the Morelli family. Her life is our life. Her enemies are our enemies. To touch her," he locked eyes with every man at the table, "is to declare war on us all." One by one, the old men rose, raising their glasses. "To Lila," they rumbled, the sound a definitive, binding contract. Lila stood, her back straight, and met their gazes. One by one. She didn't flinch. She just nodded once, accepting their oath, not as a gift, but as a fact. The girl who had been invisible her whole life was now the most protected and most dangerous woman in the city. Later that night, the adrenaline of the meeting faded, leaving them in the quiet of their new home. It wasn't a penthouse. It was a sprawling, historic brownstone in the city's oldest, most exclusive neighborhood, its deed held by a shell corporation so clean it gleamed. It was surrounded by a 10-foot reinforced brick wall, and the windows were all bulletproof. It was a fortress disguised as old money. Lila stood in the massive, dark-paneled library, a glass of wine in her hand, staring into a cold fireplace. Dante came in, shedding his jacket. He had been in meetings all day, settling the bloody accounts of the new piece. He looked tired. He came up behind her, his hands settling on her hips. He didn't kiss her. He just rested his chin on her shoulder, breathing her in. "So," she said quietly, "La Padrona, the boss's lady, that's what they'll call me, isn't it? The girl who saved the boss. I was thinking," he said, his voice a low rumble against her ear, "that we could leave." Lila froze. She turned in his arms to face him. "Leave? Leave what? This house? The city?" "All of it," he said. His eyes were deadly serious. "The business, the life. I have enough, buried in enough places to last us 10 lifetimes. We could go tonight. We could be in Argentina or Greece or just nowhere. Just gone." It was the proposal of a desperate man, a fantasy. He was proposing to cut off his own arm, to stop being the shark and become... what? A civilian? Lila looked at him, the man who commanded rooms, the man who bled for his family, the man who had buried his heart and was now offering it to her. She touched his face, her fingers tracing the healed-over cut on his cheekbone. "Dante," she said softly, "you can't. You know you can't." His jaw tightened. "I can... for you. I would." "And what would you be?" she asked, her voice not accusing, but piercingly honest. "You'd be a ghost. You'd be miserable in 6 months, looking over your shoulder, waiting for a fight that was never coming. You're not built to run. Dante, you're built to rule." "This," she gestured around the opulent, fortified room, "this is who you are. The violence. The power. It's in your blood." He pulled away, his frustration a tangible thing, a dark energy vibrating in the room. "And I don't want it in yours. I don't want this life for you, Lila. I don't want you to be like me, to see the things I've seen, to do the things I've done." "I already have," she said, her voice unshakable. "I was in the tunnel. I was in the warehouse. I was the one holding the gun. You can't put me back in the box. Dante, I'm not the bartender from Fairhaven anymore. You broke that." He looked at her, his conflict raw and open. "So what do we do? I won't have you by my side at warehouse meetings. I won't have your hands dirtied with blood," she finished for him. "I know." She took a deep breath. "You're right. I'm not a killer. I'm not an enforcer. I won't be part of the violence." She walked to the massive desk, picking up a stack of financial reports she had been reading earlier, the ones from Sophia. "But this," she said, holding them up, "this is just numbers. This is logistics. This is running a dozen legitimate businesses. Shipping, import, restaurants, real estate. This is where the real power is, the part Sophia handles." "You want to work with Sophia?" he asked, incredulous. "I want to help," Lila said, her eyes flashing. "You're a king, Dante, but you're a wartime king. You know how to fight, how to take, how to hold. You don't know how to build. All these fronts, these businesses, they're sloppy. They're just fronts. They could be empires, and they could be so clean, so legitimate, that no one would ever be able to touch us. Not the law, not our rivals. She stepped toward him, her passion making her glow. You can't leave the business, so don't change it. You keep your hands in the shadows. Let me keep my hands on the books. You be the iron fist. I'll be the velvet glove. I won't help you with the violence. I'll be the one who makes it so you don't have to be violent as often. I'll keep you grounded. I'll keep you human. He stared at her, stunned. He had seen her as something to protect, something to shield from his world, but she wasn't asking for protection. She was offering a partnership. She wasn't just accepting his world. She was offering to help him conquer it. He finally smiled, that slow, dangerous, breath-stealing smile. La Padrona, he said again, but this time it wasn't a title. It was a recognition. The next few months were a blur. They moved, not to Argentina, but to the brownstone. Their new life began. It was fresh, but it was far from clean. Lila met his inner circle, not as his girlfriend, but as his partner. The first meeting was a test. The capos, the old men, had been respectful. But this was different. This was his crew. Leo, Nico, Sophia. Sophia was the hardest. She saw Lila as a threat, a usurper on her territory. The books. The girl thinks she can play with numbers, Sophia said, her voice dripping with disdain, at a meeting in the new library. The girl, Lila said, not even looking up from the ledger, found $3.2 million you've been losing in administrative waste at the shipping terminals, which, by the way, is a subsidiary of a shell company that still has a dead man listed as its CEO. The room went silent. Dante, sitting at the head of the table, just steepled his fingers, a tiny flicker of amusement in his eyes. Lila finally looked up, her gaze pinning Sophia. You're smart. Sophia, you're good at hiding money. You're just not very good at making it. From now on, I approve every transaction over 50,000 and you will report to me. Sophia's face went white, then red. She looked to Dante, expecting him to defend her, to put the civilian in her place. Dante just looked at his cousin. You heard her. That was it. The balance of power shifted. Lila wasn't just the girl who saved Dante. She was the woman who ran the books. She was the one who could find the money. And in their world, that was the ultimate power. She had earned their respect, not by standing her ground, but by taking it. That night, the house was quiet. A cold winter rain lashed against the bulletproof windows. Lila was in the library, in front of the fireplace, which now had a warm, crackling fire in it. She was deep in a ledger, a glass of red wine at her elbow. Dante came in, silent as ever. He was carrying a small, velvet box. You'll strain your eyes, he said, his voice soft. I'm fine, she murmured, not looking up. I'm just cross-referencing the payroll for the restaurant. I think one of the managers is skimming. Lila! His voice was firm. She looked up. He was holding out the box. She put down the ledger. What's this? A late Christmas present or an early birthday present? It's for you. She took the box. Inside, nestled on black velvet, was a necklace. It was not a showy piece. It was a simple platinum chain, and the pendant was a single, teardrop-shaped black diamond. It was elegant, dark, and beautiful. Dante, it's perfect, she breathed. Turn it over, he said. She did. On the back, at the top, was a tiny, almost invisible clasp. It's a locket. No. He took it from her, his large, scarred fingers surprisingly deft. He unclipped the chain and held up the pendant. He pressed a spot on the side that she hadn't even seen, with a near-silent shing, a tiny, needle-sharp blade, no longer than her pinky nail, slid from the bottom point of the diamond. It was black, gleaming, made of some kind of ceramic or obsidian. It's small, he said, but it's sharp, and it won't be found by a metal detector. Aim for the eye or under the jaw. Lila stared at the tiny, beautiful, lethal object. He was an enforcer. He was a killer. And he was giving her a weapon. He retracted the blade and fastened the necklace around her neck. The diamond was cold against her skin, and heavy, I will spend every day of my life keeping you safe, he whispered, his lips brushing her ear. But you are not the kind of woman who waits to be saved. He kissed the skin just behind her earlobe. So you'll always have protection. She turned in his arms, her hand going to the diamond, feeling its weight. She looked up at him, the man who understood, better than anyone, that the most beautiful things were often the most dangerous. Thank you, she said. She rose on her toes and kissed him, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of wine and promises. Spring came. The city thawed, and the new Morelli Empire, under their joint command, began to flourish. The violence ebbed, replaced by ruthless, silent efficiency. They were starting fresh, but they were never, ever clean. One warm night, Dante took her to the roof. He had cleared it. No guards, no antenna, just a single table, 2 chairs, a bottle of wine, and 1,000 candles flickering in the warm breeze. Below them, the city glowed, a vast, glittering ocean of light. Every single one a story, a life that they would never know. The danger was always there, a low hum beneath the noise of the traffic, a shadow in the alleys between the glittering towers. But up here, with him, the love was closer. They sat in silence for a long time, just drinking, just watching. It's beautiful, Lila said, leaning her head on his shoulder. I never used to think so, he said, his arm wrapped around her, his hand playing with the diamond at her throat. I always just saw it as a map of enemies, a grid. And now? It was quiet for a long time. She could feel the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. You know, he said, his voice so low she almost missed it. I have never been afraid in my life, not in the alley, not in the warehouse, not with a gun to my head. Fear wasn't a thing I had. He turned, his dark eyes finding hers in the candlelight. But the moment you walked into that bar, wearing sarcasm and cheap perfume, I have never been more terrified in my entire life. Terrified? She asked, her heart aching. Of what? Of you, he admitted, his voice raw. Of what you made me feel. Of what I knew I would do to keep you. I knew, from that first second, that you were the one who could destroy me, and I was right. Lila looked at this man, this king, this killer, who was laying his terrified, resurrected heart at her feet. The cheap perfume was long gone, replaced by something expensive he'd bought her. But the sarcasm was forever. A slow, teasing smile spread across her face. She reached up, tracing the scar on his jaw. Good, she whispered, her eyes sparkling in the dark. Now you know how I felt when you didn't kiss me that first night. He stared at her for a second, processing her words, and then a low, genuine laugh rumbled out of his chest. He pulled her to her feet, his hands on her waist. You are, he said, going to be the death of me, Lila Reed, or the life of you, she countered, pulling his head down for a kiss. He kissed her, deep and long, a kiss that held all the promise of their new, dangerous, beautiful life. He broke it, but he didn't let her go. He just turned her in his arms, so her back was against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her head, and he held her. They stood together, watching the skyline. 2 broken people, 2 survivors. He was a man haunted by the ghosts of his past. She was a woman who had never had a home. But here, together, overlooking a city of enemies, they were haunted, yes, but they were finally home. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We truly hope you enjoyed this journey with Lila and Dante. This is Mafia Romance Stories, and we love bringing these worlds to life for you. We'd be thrilled to know where you're listening from. So please drop a comment and let us know what city or country you're in. If you loved this story, please consider subscribing to Mafia Romance Stories. It helps us create more of the content you love. And of course, we want to hear your thoughts. What was your favorite part? What did you think of Lila's transformation? Let us know in the comments, in English, so we can all share in the conversation. Thank you again, and we'll see you in the next story.